In 1969, we were introduced to a Western film that was done by Sam Peckinpah called The Wild Bunch. It starred William Holden, Ernest Borgnine, Robert Ryan, Ed O'Brien, Ben Johnson, and Warren Oates. The story is about an aging outlaw gang on the Mexican-United States border trying to adapt to the changing modern world of 1913. The movie was extremely controversial because of its graphic violence and its portrayal of crude men attempting to survive by any available means that they could come up with. Peckinpah, Waylon Green, and Roy N. Snicker wrote the screenplay. The movie was filmed in Technicolor and Panavision, all in Mexico. It's noted for its intricate, multi-angle, quick editing using normal and slow-motion images, which was a revolutionary technique for 1969. The director, Peckinpah, stated that one of his goals for the movie was to give the audience some idea of what it was like to be gunned down. A real memorable incident occurred to that end as Peckinpah's crew were consulting with him on the gunfire effects that were used in the film. Not satisfied with the results from the squibs his crew had brought for him, Peckinpah became frustrated, and he finally hollered at him. He said, "That's not what I want. That's not what I want at all." He then grabbed a real revolver and he fired it into a nearby wall. He emptied the gun. Peckinpah yelled back at the stunned crew, "That's the effect I want." He also had the gunfire sounds changed for the film. Before that, all the gunshots that were done for Warner Brothers sound identical. This is regardless of the type of weapon that was being used. Peckinpah insisted on each different type of firearm having its own specific sound effect when they fired it. The director would drive his crew so hard that it sometimes created friction and confrontations between him and certain members of the cast. Early in the shooting, William Holden threatened to walk off the set if Peckinpah continued to verbally abuse the crew in his presence. Robert Ryan threatened to punch the director at one time after he made him spend 10 days in costume and makeup without filming any scenes and not allowing him a few days off to campaign for Senator Robert Kennedy. Now, we'll get more into Robert Ryan a little bit later on, but there was a real controversy between Ryan and the director that we'll touch on in just a little bit. Ernest Borgnine promised to beat the crap out of the director if he didn't allow him some relief from the throat-clogging dust that was affecting the actors' breathing on location. I guess the set conditions were terrible. It was hot and dusty the entire time they were there. Over time, they felt like the cast was really becoming the Wild Bunch. Warner Brothers previewed the film and audiences' reactions to it and found that they were often negative and hostile. Some sample comments they gathered were, "Do not release this film. The whole thing is completely sick," that it's the worst potpourri of vulgarity, violence, and sex that they've ever seen put together. The studio then wired the director, expressing the desire to cut the film further so that they would get more positive responses from the audience. Peckinpah agreed, but only in one print to be run in one theater. The rest of the theaters would show his initial cut. The studio had Phil Feldman cut the required scenes, and he went ahead and released all the prints that way. Peckinpah and Feldman had had a real productive relationship for a long time, but Peckinpah felt betrayed by this. This influenced his outlook on producers from that point on. Now, if you watch this film on Amazon Prime, you can watch either the regular theatrical cut or the director's cut. You have the option to watch either one. The famous last walk was improvised by the director during the actual shoot. Originally, the scene was to begin with the bunch leaving the whorehouse and immediately cut to the confrontation with Mapache. Once they had made the decision to lengthen this scene, many of the Mexican extras were choreographed by the assistant directors while the scene was filming. Peckinpah had it filmed with a special depth of field lens that had the effect of keeping all the people in the frame, including those in the foreground, in sharp focus as the bunch walks forward. There were not enough uniforms for all the stunt people and the extras in this gun battle. If someone was filmed getting shot, the costume people would repair the uniform by washing off the fake blood, taping and painting over the bullet holes, drying the paint, and sending either the same or a different performer out to get shot again. The director had long decided on what he wanted to have the film look like after he went on a hunting trip during the filming of Ride the High Country from 1962. After he shot a buck, he told a friend of his, "Look, the bullet went in the size of a dime, but the blood on the snow was the size of a salad plate. That's the way violence is. That's the way death is. And that's what I want to show in this film." Before William Holden was cast in this role, the role was turned down by Lee Marvin, Burt Lancaster, Jimmy Stewart, Charlton Heston, Gregory Peck, and Richard Boone. Lee Marvin had actually accepted the role, but he pulled out after he was offered a bigger payday to star in Paint Your Wagon from 1969. He also felt that the film was a little bit too much like The Professionals that he did from 1966, which also starred Robert Ryan. The director was notorious for being a demanding director and a hard ass. He fired 22 cast members during the course of this shoot. He had no compassion for a guy with a job who had a family at home who makes a simple mistake. That wasn't his concern. He had no understanding that people do make mistakes. Peckinpah burned a lot of bridges with a lot of people because of his actions. But he was a brilliant director. The little additional things that he put into a scene remind me a lot of Sergio Leone, who is probably, in my opinion, the best at creating an atmosphere that you can feel, smell, and taste everything that's going on in a scene. Peckinpah was pretty close to being second in this category. An example of this is that he wanted to add the sound of flies buzzing in the post-battle scene. He felt like that without it, the movie just wasn't complete. The shoot itself went off surprisingly well. It was all done in 79 days. There were 2 small accidents that happened. Ben Johnson broke his finger on a machine gun, and William Holden burned his arm on a misfired squib. The only thing that complicated the filming was the dust and the heat, which was relentless. But Peckinpah didn't care. He insisted that the movie be filmed in Mexico. Ernest Borgnine had some really good tales from this filming, and one of them was about Emilio Fernandez, who plays the general. He talks about how he was a hell of a man. When he went to bars and restaurants, he often brought 14-year-old girls with him, and that he was drunk most of the time, and he always carried 2 guns in his belt. He was constantly making offensive statements to people, and his behavior was upsetting to his friends and made them very uncomfortable. And with good reason. While he was directing a film in Mexico, because he was a famed director in Mexico, not just an actor, he got into an argument with 2 of the film's producers, and he shot and killed one of them. He was actually sentenced to prison for this act. Ben Johnson tells the story about the Mexican women that are frolicking with him and Warren Oates in that huge wine vat, that they weren't actresses at all. They were real prostitutes from a nearby brothel. Sam Peckinpah had hired them just specifically so he could tell people that Warner Brothers had paid for hookers for his cast. Now, Robert Ryan complained and complained to the director and to the producers about not receiving top billing for his role. Peckinpah, being the jerk that he was, decided to punish Ryan, and he did this in a very unique way. In the opening credits, after freezing the screen on close-ups of William Holden and Ernest Borgnine's faces while listing them in the credits, Peckinpah freezes the scene for Ryan's name with a bunch of horse rear ends pointing towards the camera. That was his way of getting back at Ryan and saying that he was a real horse's ass for complaining so much. If you've never seen this film, it's a classic. If you've seen it, you know what I mean. Go ahead and watch it again. It never gets old. I'm a big Sam Peckinpah fan, and he outdid himself on this one. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.